Calendly raises a huge round of financing as it becomes a global scheduling platform. Yak 2.0 launches to bring asynchronous audio communications to the enterprise, and Qualtrics has a huge IPO. That and more on this week's PLG123. Let's dive in. Tab 1. Tab 1 is from TechCrunch and is about Calendly's huge round of financing. So here's what happened. Calendly raised a huge round. And by huge, I mean $350 million. This round was led by your pals here at OpenView, along with Iconic Capital and Greenspring Associates. Putting the size of the round aside, what's most notable here is the fact that prior to this round, Calendly had only raised $550,000 of total capital. You see that round took place almost 7 years ago. So it's safe to say that Calendly has been highly capital efficient. So here's why this matters. Besides being a well-known and well-loved product, and the fact that the TechCrunch article here points to $70 million of ARR, what do VCs, like me, see in the business going forward? Well, it's a pretty straightforward thesis that has two core points. So the first point is that this is a universal pain point. And the second point is that this is product-led growth at its best with virality. So unpacking both of those. More to the universal pain point, this quote of "I love scheduling and scheduling emails" has been said by nobody, and we can all resonate with that. This is a pain point that's experienced by all roles, all use cases, all industries, in all countries. In other words, all people. And when you're serving all people, it's a pretty big market opportunity. Specifically, 1 billion users. Moving on to point number 2, and it's all about product-led growth and specifically the viral loop that exists at Calendly. I unpacked this on the PLG123 back in the summer when Calendly crossed the $50 million ARR mark. Suffice it to say that there are two really powerful things about this viral loop, that by using Calendly, users are promoting it as well. It is inherently viral and it is meant to be shared and sent to other people. And number 2 is that the viral loop is a snowball and that it compounds. So you have that original user who continues to send it to all of their contacts, and you now have the recipient who starts to send it to all of their contacts as well. And it continues to acquire additional users along the way. So here's what to keep your eye on going forward. Calendly is increasingly becoming a platform company. We've pointed to examples on the PLG123 before of the Calendly scheduling page being embedded in other people's websites and products, like you see here with Slack, but we're also seeing other companies bake Calendly into products that they launch, and this was a great example that launched on Product Hunt last week from a company called Jam. Jam launched a new product or a new offering called Genies, which allows you to talk to individual people about your website, and that all gets scheduled through Calendly. I definitely expect to see more examples like this in the future. Tab 2. Tab 2 is from Product Hunt and is about the new launch from audio communication startup Yak. So here's what happened. Yak has been popular with the Product Hunt community for a couple of years now. It actually launched at the very first Makers Festival that Product Hunt hosted back in November of 2018. The makers behind Yak said it took them about 2 weeks to build the first version that they launched at the Makers Festival. And if you're wondering what Yak means, it's short for Yelling Across Cubicles, which is the perfect name for a self-described walkie-talkie app. More specifically, the inspiration and idea for Yak came from a disdain for meetings and asynchronous communication with teams, especially when that's remote work across time zones. But on the other hand, only having text-based communication in Slack also isn't sufficient. There's a lot of context that is missing in just text. So the solution, this walkie-talkie app, was described as a happy medium between a Slack message and a Zoom call. And after Yak won the remote workers category at that first Makers Festival, the subsequent launch on Product Hunt itself tells a great rehash of that history story for Yak. Here's Justin Mitchell, the founder and CEO, who says that Yak was a blast to create over the last 2 weeks, and they were super stoked to see it win the remote workers category at the Makers Festival that year. So here's why this matters. Many products get a lot of love at launch, but are quickly forgotten by users and even abandoned by makers weeks or months later. But that's clearly not the case with Yak. They've been very busy over the last 2 years as the product has gone from side project to real-life startup, and as they've continued to build and iterate and build a true user base and platform around the initial launch adoption. Going to check out some of the specific features and use cases, if I click here on asynchronous meetings, you see that this tagline is still very true to the original idea that when Slack doesn't cut it and Zoom isn't possible, that's exactly where Yak steps in. And I also really like the ability to do a screen recording with a voiceover and annotations. It will remind you of an audio-only version of Loom or something like that. And to close it out with the Yak updates, they also announced a $7.5 million Series A from GGV Capital and the Slack Fund. So they got some gas in the tank and they're ready to keep building. So here's what to keep your eye on going forward. Whether it's text, video, or audio, asynchronous communication is becoming the lifeblood of working teams today, especially with the rise of remote work. Yak is clearly betting on audio as the asynchronous communication channel of choice. Tab 3. Tab 3 is from Forbes and is about Qualtrics' huge IPO. So here's what happened. Qualtrics raised a whopping $1.55 billion in its IPO last week. The IPO priced at $30 a share, but after its day one pop and trading session, it finished the day above $45 a share, giving it a market cap of almost $30 billion. So here's why this matters. Another multi-billion-dollar tech IPO is a little bit ho-hum these days in terms of newsworthiness. But what's more unique is that Qualtrics is owned by SAP. As the headline of this article says that Qualtrics finally goes public, it's because they filed originally 2 years ago. And right on the cusp of going public, SAP swooped in and acquired the business for $8 billion. So here we are 2 years later, and CEO Ryan Smith is getting a second crack at going public. And this time it worked, big time. And it also seems to be the right call for both Qualtrics as well as SAP, because going from an $8 billion valuation 2 years ago to a nearly $30 billion valuation, it clearly unlocked a lot of value in the underlying company. So here's what to keep your eye on going forward. With so much demand for high-growth SaaS stocks, I think we're going to continue to see interesting situations like this where large parent companies like SAP spin out previous acquisitions or divisions to go public and live life on their own. On the PLG123 alone, we've talked about Vimeo being spun out from IAC. That IPO just happened as well, and it's now an independent company. We also talked about Plaid walking away from Visa. That's right, Plaid was the one that wanted to walk away from its acquirer, even though it was a $5 billion acquisition that most people thought was a huge success story. But really, Plaid, after a year of trying to get this deal done and running into some regulatory issues, realized that they're worth a lot more than $5 billion now, and they wanted to walk away, wanted to live life independently, and now they're getting offers at $15 billion. So again, seems like the right call for Plaid. So who's next in line for big breakups or spin-outs? I'm personally going to keep a close eye on large platform players like IBM and Oracle, who may want to follow in SAP's footsteps and take advantage of the arbitrage opportunity that exists when you spin a SaaS asset out independently. Well, that does it for this week on the PLG123. Make sure to follow me on LinkedIn for more daily PLG content, and stay tuned for our weekly episode drops of the PLG123 coming at you right here on LinkedIn. Hope you all are having a great week, and take care.